Hello and welcome to the App Fairy podcast. My name is Carissa Christner. I am a children's librarian at the Madison Public Library, and I love to talk to app makers and find out what it is that motivates them to make apps. And I like to help you get to know them a little bit better too through these interviews. Today we're going to be talking with the makers of the Tinybop apps. These guys make great apps for school-age kids, which is a slightly older audience than some of the other app makers that I've talked with recently on this podcast. And for this episode, we're going to try something a little bit different. About a year ago, I was totally enchanted when I heard an interview with Raul Gutierrez of Tinybop that was done by Kabir Seth of the Diversity in Apps podcast. Since then, the podcast has actually changed its name to Diversity Sauce. You'll have to tune in to find out why. It's a really great story. And they broadened their scope to talk more about diversity in children's media in general. Their podcast, Diversity Sauce, has some excellent content, and I definitely recommend listening to all of their other episodes. But for today, they were kind enough to let us play for you part of the interview that Kabir did with Tinybop last year. I'll follow up today with a mini interview that I did with Raul recently. But for now, let's take a listen to Raul speaking with Kabir of Diversity Sauce.
So your road to Tinybop, from what I've read, has sort of been a roundabout path. You started out in Hollywood, sort of took a step back from that for a little while, but you stayed close to the industry. You ran your own sort of movie analytics firm for a little while, and then you moved to the East Coast and you got started with an art startup during the early days of Flash sales.
That's correct.
Is that right?
That's sort of roughly correct.
And then your sort of inspiration for Tinybop actually came from your son. So how did that happen? Tell me that story.
I've always been interested in children's books.
Okay.
And in kids' media. The one thing that my parents really spoiled us with were books. And so we didn't have a ton of toys. We had a lot of books.
Right.
And then also, I grew up in between Mexico and Texas. With children's media, especially in Mexico, it was always a little bit weird. You would get... we had all this Japanese stuff that was dubbed in Spanish.
Okay.
So, my favorite children's show is this show that, everybody in Mexico that's of my age knows. It's called Cometo-san, which in Mexico they called Señorita Cometa, which is sort of like a Japanese Bewitched.
Wow.
With these little animated characters.
Okay.
It was dubbed in Spanish. It was kind of weird.
Right.
And I always loved the weirdness of children's books. And then when I had my own kids, it was like they were my laboratory.
Right.
First of all, I had more kids' books than is sort of reasonable for any
It's
adult.
overflowing bookshelf, right?
And I couldn't wait to expose them to all these cool books. So for me, books were really the starting point. Mm-hmm. And then my kids were... Once we started to have iPhones and iPads in the house, my kids were really the first generation to see those or play with those as kids. My oldest son was born in 2004. Just when he was getting cognizant of the world is when the first iPads and iPhones came out. Instantly, they became his favorite toy. He called them the Everything Machine, which is actually now the name of one of our products.
Right.
And it's because for him they were tools, they were toys, they were passive entertainment, active entertainment. They did all these. At the point when I started Tinybop, I was actually sort of searching for an idea, like many people who lead these kind of non-linear lives. I've done many things in my life, and I've started a whole bunch of things, and I knew I wanted to create a startup in mobile. I didn't know exactly where. I was looking at a whole bunch of other ideas that had nothing to do with kid stuff. Mm-hmm. My kid, who was about to have his kindergarten birthday, came to me and he asked if he could trade his birthday party for an iPhone. To me, that just floored me because, if you know anything about
at that age
about kindergartners, the birthday party is like the centerpiece of the year. It's the way that they if they're angry at a friend, they'll say, "You're not coming to my birthday party." You know,
the ultimate insult.
So the fact that he was willing to like sell out all his friends,
a different spin on it, yeah.
Which he really cared about. He really loved his friends. So the fact that he was willing to sell out all his friends for this device,
right?
I just knew it had a lot of power over him, and I wanted to understand it because I, as a parent, especially as like. My wife and I call ourselves people of the book, not so much in a religious sense, but just because our house we're worried that it's going to collapse because of all the books we have.
Right.
That I was kind of threatened by the screen, especially in the context of kids. I just started deciding, I realized it was important and I wanted to understand it. And so not so much as a business thing or anything, I just wanted to understand what my kid was doing.
What's the appeal?
Why was it so powerful for him?
Right.
What was the thing that gave it this draw for him? And what I found ultimately was that it was the form. It's this incredible form because you're actually touching something's happening back. It's incredibly responsive. And many of the things that he was attracted to were tools. You know, he liked taking pictures and making movies and so on. Many were games that were games that were actually not designed for kids. They were designed for adults, like casual games.
Right.
And back in sort of 2009, 2010, the game space for kids, I found, was really, really thin. There were a lot of apps that were designed around early numeracy and early literacy, which was fine and were great. But there were very few apps around a lot of the subjects that I was really interested in and that my kids were really interested in, which were sort of more science-y subjects about the world. And the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about sort of my own childhood, like I grew up in a small East Texas town that's not known for anything good.
You get back there often?
Not so much. I mean, it's a town split by train tracks into black and white.
Sure.
My dad was from Mexico. My mom was from New York. I was called the wetback Yankee. That was my teachers called me that in school. I mean, we were one of the last federally desegregated school districts in the country. I mean, it was a racially polarized, like, kind of backwards place. And it's changed a lot. Things have changed and gotten much better, but back then it was really isolated. And it was sort of like this island. And I always thought of it as this island, instead of being surrounded by water, it was surrounded by trees. Mm-hmm. And it was isolated in that we had one channel on the television, and most mornings it was just farm and ranch news with a guy with a big cowboy hat. The radio was sort of country radio. There was no cable television. It was isolated. There were no bookstores. You didn't have access to the outside world. And so for me, my escape was the library.
I see. And
I would go to the library, and I would go to the children's section, and they had sets of children's encyclopedias that essentially gave you context for the world.
Right.
And the Childcraft Library, they had one book on space and one book on mammals and one book on dinosaurs. And through reading my way through that library, serendipitously, I sort of discovered what I was interested in. I discovered that there was this whole other world that was outside of where I was living. It gave me some understanding of that world.
Right.
In Mexico, I spent a lot of time in Mexico, too, with my grandparents, and it was another kind of island in that it was, my grandparents lived in Monterrey, which is a big city, but we often would, in the summer, we'd go out to their ranch, which was in the middle of nowhere, and so then you were just cut off from everything. And what I realized with iPhone and iPad was that Apple and Google have created like these amazing distribution systems that can reach everywhere. There was this way in which you could create content that could sort of reach out into all those little islands.
Right, those kids who are in those isolated islands.
Those kids that are sort of out there everywhere.
Right.
And the internet largely performs the same function. I mean, the internet sort of connects people to all these things. But the internet's a horrible interface for a 6-year-old.
Right.
You know, the thing about the internet is you kind of have to know what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And you have to sort of be motivated for a subject. The thing about a series of apps that is very affordable and that we try to make even more affordable to schools is that parent buys the whole series and they have this set of apps that explains the world. It's that same serendipitous. Yeah. It's not exactly an encyclopedia, but it's a way to understand these various subjects.
Right.
And so from the beginning, my goal was I wanted to build apps that covered these subjects that my kids were interested in. I wanted to make them as beautiful as these children's books that I'd always loved, and as weird. The childhood's weird.
Yeah.
The way that children see the world is a little strange. There was so much children's media that is just extremely straightforward, and it's like it's the bright colors and like the cute character, and that's not necessarily how kids see the world. I wanted each app to have this maybe touch of strangeness to it. Sort of little by little, we came up with this idea for our company. From the beginning, the big ideas were that we wanted to be inclusive because we wanted to reach these islands of people, and you can be in an island in a big city just if you come from a bad economic situation in which maybe you don't have a house full of books. That said, the iPhones and iPads are fairly universal. By 2018, it's predicted that virtually every adult on Earth is going to have a smartphone in their pocket.
Right.
And so our question is, how do we, at a very low price, provide a lot of great quality media? And then our next challenge, of course, is to get people to actually download it, give it away to schools, and so on and so on.
So when you touched on this a little bit, you looked at sort of back in 2010 what kids apps look like, and your design philosophy is, as I think you've said it more than once, is sort of design for quiet as opposed to designing with sort of gamification or badges and what. So what sort of made you, was that as a result of research? Obviously you had your children as your first lab rats, but was that...
Part of it was that idea of I started asking myself, why does screen time really bother me so much as a parent? And it's because I would see that with many things that were so-called kids apps, that they were designed to essentially overstimulate kids. Mm-hmm. They were using what are essentially gambling algorithms or gaming loops that encourage, you have to hit the button. It's like this Pavlovian loop that it leads kids really jangled. I mean, kids, especially at that age, every parent knows that they can be overstimulated. And when a kid is overstimulated, they're often kind of foul-tempered, in a bad mood, and
you can't take it away.
The minute you take the iPad away, then suddenly they're just awful.
Right.
And so I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to do what a good book does and what a good science experiment does. We use the term of art. It's not our term, but we wanted to create explorable explanations. Each app is essentially a working model of the thing. We have two series. Each app in the Explorer's Library is essentially a working model of the thing that we're trying to show. So the human body, it's a little model of the body.
Right.
You feed it, food goes in one end, poop comes out the other end.
You tap the eye.
You tap the eye, and we use the camera to show how it works. It blinks. But it's accurate. It's not dumbed down for kids.
Right.
If you turn on the labels in our kids app, there are medical schools that are using the app as a way to have people learn various parts of the body. So we don't dumb things down. They're accurate. Our Simple Machines app, all those little interactions with the little 6 simple machines, they're all, the physics are right.
Yeah, I know. I do it with my son, the bicycle one. He loves that one.
So we spent a lot of time to make sure that the physics were the correct physics. Right. The hope is that in creating this quiet experience, one that doesn't have a soundtrack that's kind of running behind it, that doesn't have this sort of gamification loop, that you will slow kids down enough so they want to explore. And that's where the slight touch of weirdness comes in. It's because, we have to give kids a reason to explore these things. We have a weather app. And a lot of weather stuff, it's a sunny day, it's a cloudy day. How do you show that in an interesting way? We have these strange people that populate this land that have, antlers, for no particular reason other than it just creates this mood that's mysterious and that draws kids in. And I think that when we do our job, what happens is that the output of the apps is not that the kid sort of knows everything about the subject. It is that your child would ask you questions. We design our Explorers Library series so that children will ask questions.
Right.
We're not. We hope that some of the answers are embedded in the interactions. In our human body app, what's the most important thing about the skeletal system? Holds the body up. So if you remove the spine, it falls down,
right.
and hopefully that idea is embedded in that. But the real goal of that whole series is to start conversations between parents and teachers and kids. When we've done our job, the kids are full of questions. And in fact, one of my favorite negative comments that we got on the App Store, somebody gave us a 1-star review. And this woman said, I leave my kid at home with the iPad, and when I come home, she's just full of questions. I'm like, lady, this is...
It's not a babysitter.
Yeah, this is the point. The point is I want you to talk to your kids. And so with that series, that's the goal. We have this whole other series,
the
Digital Toys series. Each of those apps in that series are a construction kit. The idea there is it was the anti-Legos.
Yeah, I know. You've gotten a little flack for this. Right?
Yeah, and you know,
I guess you didn't mean to take a shot directly at Lego. It's just
no, I did. Like modern Legos.
Oh, okay, I should say only Lego. Yeah.
First of all, I love Lego. I love a lot of things about Lego, but a lot of the way that modern Legos are sold is as a disassembled toy.
Right.
That kids follow instructions and they get to a single endpoint and they put it on their shelf and then sort of gradually it falls apart. And then, all the pieces go into a bin and they lost the instructions and it's done. And then you buy the next one. Legos, when I was a kid, were blocks. And I think this is why Minecraft is so successful. I mean, blocks are sort of the ultimate... if you have sort of blocks that can kind of be interchanged and built into anything, all you need is a little bit of a context. And if you have... Here in the office, we have square Lego blocks, and kids come over and they're like, I don't know what to do with them, because they're the modern kids that have only, known that you have to follow the instructions.
Right, where are the instructions?
And I'll say, well, build a zoo. And a lot of times there's this slight moment of confusion, and then there's quiet, and then you come back and there's this beautiful little zoo, and they feel really proud of it.
Right.
Well, that's basically what Digital Toys is. Every app in that series is a construction kit built around a context. So the first one's a robot factory. You have a whole bunch of robot parts. They all are autonomous. You have spider legs and humanoid legs,
right,
and all sorts of slithery legs or whatever. And you put them on bodies, but we're not telling you how to do it. The kid's creating their own narrative. And if we've done our job right, at the end of that app, the kid is going to have a story and a name that's something that we didn't imagine. Mm-hmm. That's something that's completely out of our experience. And we were just in a class deep in Brooklyn in Bensonhurst the other day, and the teacher is using it in her kindergarten as a storytelling and as part of their storytelling and poem workshop. And basically, each kid in the class created a robot. And then she asked them to tell the story. And the range of stories that the kids came out with was amazing, because some the kids were avatars for themselves, and some they were the parents, and some they were some super or something or other that they had hoped they could be. And we see the same thing in the office. We have a great video where we just invited kids from Brooklyn, and we asked them what their robots were, and one kid's like, mine's a robot butler. He brings me food, and there's this other little girl that was like, my robot likes fancy hotels. She likes cheese sandwiches. To me, those apps are successful when it's not something that's been created from our imagination. It's something that the kids, we've just given them the push and the context.
Right.
It's like the set of blocks and you say build a zoo, and then they're building their own zoo.
Right. So a couple questions. How do you said this a couple times, we know we've done our job right. How have you sort of measured these things? It sounds like you guys go into schools.
We go into schools. Each app we test in schools. We have a range of local schools that we work with. We bring kids in here, ads on Craigslist or school listservs or whatever, and we do play testing in the office. I do informal testing, because there are some things that happen in the office. If a kid's sitting there and playing the app, that are different than when you're at a birthday party and there's like 16 kids.
Other things.
I have a couple of magic iPads that have like every popular everything on there, and they're Minecraft and everything else. And then I put our apps on those pages. I see if how long they're going to play our app, how quickly they're going to switch to something else, whether they keep coming back. There are many kids, especially kids that have only been used to these vast games. The first time they come to our apps, they're a little disoriented.
Sure.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
We're not telling them what to do.
Right. I would imagine the way I've seen it when a kid has touched your app is the first question is usually, so now what do I do?
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like you like that. You expect that and
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to give them a reason to come back. But hopefully, usually it's, the artwork or some small thing that even if they quit, they'll start and they'll quit the app because they don't know what to do. They'll think about it and then they'll come back.
Yeah.
Once they come back, then you start to see these kind of long explorations.
They'll dig into it a little bit more.
Wasn't that a great interview? If you'd like to hear the rest of it, be sure to check out the Diversity Sauce podcast and look for episode 4. For now, though, I've got Raul Gutierrez on the phone with me for a few follow-up questions since that interview was about a year ago. Welcome to the App Fairy podcast, Raul.
Hi.
Hi. Just a couple of quick questions first. Where are your offices located?
We are in downtown Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue.
Oh, very nice. All right, so right here in the United States. How many staff do you have?
We have about 22 people, depending on how you count them, and we have a few people around the world.
Nice. So you've got you've got a pretty big staff, and you have people that are in different parts of the world too?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, so one of the big questions that this podcast likes to focus on is this question of joint media engagement. And you mentioned in your interview with Kabir, you had a story of that negative review from a kid who had too many questions, that this mom was upset that that their child was asking too many questions after they used your app. And that's clearly a really great way to encourage joint media engagement. But do you have other elements, or do you want to talk more about that in your app design that specifically encourage connections between people?
Sure. Well, from the beginning, our apps have an inquiry-based philosophy around them. So we try to show rather than to tell, and we try to embed learning in interactions. So rather than having a page of text, we will have the app, do something that should reveal the meaning. Oftentimes, the thing that is happening is something that it's new to a kid. A lot of times if a kid is looking at something in space or in the inside of an elephant or, in a cold front, it's not something that they've experienced before. So they will logically and naturally have questions, and we want those questions to come out to parents and educators. We designed for parents and for educators a series of handbooks that answer a lot of those questions and go through the learning goals of the app. The apps can be played and are fun without those, but with those, it really adds to the experience. And for me, that's the most fun part of the app is sitting with a kid and asking them, what they're seeing.
Yeah, you mentioned your handbooks, and I just want to make sure that listeners out there have found your handbooks, because those are amazing. Those are probably the best resources for any apps that I've seen out there about ways to not just dig deeper into the app, but also learn more information about the topic that is at hand, right? And they're in so many different languages too. They're just really fantastic. So thank you for designing those and including those in your app.
Yeah, and I don't know if you are aware of our Me app. It came about during the election last year, and we didn't mean it to have any connection to the election, but what was interesting was that it ended up that way. The Me app is a self-portrait app. It's an app in which a kid can, they start by creating an avatar of themselves and of the people in their lives. So it could be parents and friends, teachers, and they create little visual representations of all those people, and soon their pets. So we let them create those things. And then we have hundreds of questions within the app that we ask about each of those people in their lives. And they can answer them with a drawing or by telling a story, recording their voice, or writing something. And the idea is that little by little, we start to reveal not just a portrait of yourself, but of, a kid's whole world. And what's interesting about that is that a lot of times we're asking kids how they feel about something or why they, why they like something or why they don't like something. And what we started seeing very early on during testing, I saw with my own kids, is that during the election there were a lot of big feelings about things that were going on. I think there were a lot of parents that were very emotionally invested in the election, and kids didn't really have a space to talk about it. And so the app was this really interesting way for those feelings to come out. And I saw it with my own kid. I always say I'm the most unlikely looking Mexican, but I'm Mexican Irish. I probably look more Irish than Mexican. My wife is Korean, so my kids are like, they have the Mexican last names, but they're sort of Asian looking. But in their school, like many places in the country, it was very divided over the election. There were some really vocal Trump supporters who, at one point, surrounded a Hispanic teacher and were chanting, "Build a wall, build a wall, build a wall." My son was super upset by this, but didn't really have a place to talk about it. It was something he saw. It was, and interestingly, it came out in the app. And so in the middle of that process, I think one of the questions was, what is something that has happened recently that you wish you could tell, or tell to a parent. And, at that moment I knew that this app was worth every penny we were spending on it, because it opened up a whole line of conversations that have actually continued through the election and with other parents and so on, and has been really important to me and my family. And we hear feedback in this app that's like that. That's amazing.
That is an incredible story, and truly a testament to the power that apps can have, that can be surprising to everybody, but that can really dig deep. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I think there are a lot of people that they have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to any screen, and they think of them all as equivalent, and they think of anything that's on a screen as instantly being negative. But I look at apps like I do any other media. It's just like there are good books and books that are probably a waste of time. There are apps that are thoughtful, and there are others that aren't. They can really be something that add to the way that kids see the world and experience the world and understand the world.
Yep, I agree. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, is to try to make sure that more people hear about app developers like you and like the other really high-quality app developers that are out there, so that they make sure that they're getting some really good stuff for their kids when they are spending time on the screen. Let's talk a little bit about your artwork. So I super love the weird factor, that you called it, in your art, and I really enjoy how each different app has a different artist, and it kind of gives each app its own unique flavor, but somehow they're all still very distinctly Tinybop. So I'm curious, at what point in the process are artists chosen?
The artist it's pretty much the first thing that we do in each app.
Okay.
I mean, we choose a title internally, right, and we say, this is a subject we want to cover, and we have our own sort of rubric about what makes sense for us to cover. I mean, there are all sorts of things I would love to cover, but also probably aren't economically viable.
Right.
So we have sort of this internal process, and that process involves us choosing a subject, and we have a rubric for that subject that we go through, and we try to align it with the rest of the apps we're doing in the market. Then the first thing that we do is we go through these big sets of lists that we have that a lot of the people in the company contribute to. And we have favorite artists. We have artists that we would love to work with, people that we have design crushes on. And we're always, out there looking for new talent. I think we've learned over the years. So there are some types of artwork that are easier to work with than others. So, for example, vector art is really easy to work with, and hand-drawn art is harder to work with. But I grew up with children's books and loving children's books. And so I'm always trying to push our artwork to not to lavishly copy a children's book, but to have the same level of care that you might have. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do is to make something new and something that is right for its own medium. So our human body app, for example, is our first app. A lot of that artwork was hand-drawn, but it was referencing things like Charlie Harper. It was referencing German body artwork that you might have in a classroom in 1960s Germany.
I can totally see that.
So, if you look at that app and you look in the digestive system, you'll notice that the food kind of look like emojis, the quality of emojis. And for us, that was part of what made the whole thing come together and made it feel like it's not a copy of a book; it's its own thing. And that's what made it really get excited is when something feels new.
So do you feel like sometimes the artwork decisions or the styles influence the development of the app? For instance, like in the Monsters app, was that originally intended to have that kind of slightly creepy vibe from the beginning, or was that enhanced once you saw the style of the art?
It's sort of, I think kids in that app in particular, we just fell in love with that artist. She has a sense of humor just about everything. Mm-hmm. And she's that type of person. And so, with that app, the Venn diagram for that app was we talked to kids in different places around the world, and we asked them, what they thought about monsters. And what we found was that in different parts of the world, kids have different concepts of what monsters are.
Oh, yeah.
So in China, for example, monsters tended to be like creatures. They tended to be animals. I forget where it was, in some other part of the world, monsters tended to be like spirits of the dead. Where in the U.S. we have a very kind of elaborate monster culture. So,
yes.
It was most broad here. But what we noticed was that in the Venn diagram of children's monster stories, there was always, there was this through line in which kids would say that when they're most scared is when they're in bed, and there might be shadows on the wall, from a tree or something outside, and that's when they see monsters. So we wanted to start with that, and then give kids agency over that experience. So they're starting with these shadows and this sort of shadowy thing on the wall, and then little by little they get to choose and they get to create the monster. And it's a little like, that Ed Emberley book, Go Away, Big Green Monster? It's this book that gives kids agency because they get to build the monster and then they get to make it go away.
And don't come back until I say so.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so it was a little bit of inspired by that kind of thing, in which a kid can make the monster as scary or not scary as they want. I remember my niece, who was probably too young to be playing with the app, but she was like 2 or 3, and she was making a monster and like really having fun and cracking up. And at some point, she put a mouth on, and the mouth was just too scary, and she dropped the iPad. I said, no, do you want to put it away and not play anymore? And no. And then she grabbed it again and took the mouse off and put another one on.
But you're right. That's a perfect example of how kids can then just realize, oh, I have control over this monster, and I can make it the way I want it to look. And that's a real feeling of empowerment. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line in children between fear that is, feels out of control and something spooky that is kind of fun and funny too.
Yeah, I agree.
Excuse me, hello? Hi, Raul, is that your name?
That is my name.
Hi, I'm the App Fairy, and I like to come in and ask questions that kids have brought in for the podcast. And so today we have a question from Gabriel from Madison, and he wanted to know, and this is kind of a strange question, I hope you understand what it means. He wanted to know, why is there a laser cat in Infinite Arcade? Also, he wants to let you know that he thinks the robots are pretty cool.
There is a laser cat in Infinite Arcade because it is well known as a fact in my little company that I do not like cats. I am a dog person. And people in my company often put cats secretly in our apps because they know that I am not a fan of them. It's their little joke. So there is a laser cat in Infinite Arcade. I think there's actually one in the Robot Factory as well.
Oh, I'll have to let Gabriel know that he should look for that in the Robot Factory, too. I'm sure he'll be delighted with that answer. Thanks so much for talking to me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, App Fairy. Thanks for visiting, and thanks for that great question from Gabriel from Madison, Wisconsin. To wrap up our interview, Raul, did you have any last stuff? I know it's been about a year since your other interview that you had with Kabir. Are there other things that you wanted to make sure that our listeners knew about?
Sure. It's in the last year we've been very busy. We have launched 5 apps probably since that interview. Those include Skyscrapers, so lets you build your own skyscraper, Space, that takes you on a tour of the solar system, Mammals, which is a little like the human body except with elephants and sloths and a bat, and it goes really deep. I think Mammals is one of the best apps we've ever made. And then the Infinite Arcade and me. One little secret is that from June 1st through June 8th, the Robot Factory will be free, so anyone can download it and try it out.
That is an excellent tip, so we'll make sure our listeners know about that. Thanks very much.
The last thing is that we just launched on Android. It's our first several apps in the Explorers Library series. On Android, we're launching as a subscription, which means that you have to download a key app. The subscription is $10 a year. So the key app unlocks all the apps that are available on Android. Right now there are 5 apps that are available, and we'll continue to grow and add apps to that as we go along.
So eventually that $10 will unlock all of your apps on Android?
So right now there's 5 available: Home, Simple Machines, the Earth, Weather, and Skyscrapers. A little later this summer, Space will be available, and the human body later this year, and we'll continue to add to the series as we go.
That sounds like a really good setup. I'm not always a fan of subscriptions, but that sounds like a really nice way to get into the Android market and for people to be able to access lots of your apps for a very, very reasonable price. And so I'm really excited that you're doing that.
We think it's a good deal for parents, and on Android it seems to be a model that might work better than paid apps. Paid apps on Android are just not a model that seems to work well for almost anybody.
Well, good luck. I really hope that the subscription service works, and I will make sure that, well, definitely all of our listeners here will know, and I'll be sure to spread the word on my library's app review page. I do reviews for our local news station here, and so I'll talk about that there too, so that lots of people know that they can trust you like I trust you to make fantastic apps. Every app that you make, I know I can download without even having to really think about it, because I know you always do super high quality stuff.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's much appreciated, and it's why we we go to work every day, and we hope we can continue to make great stuff. We have a lot of fun doing it.
And we can tell you have a lot of fun. That's awesome. Thanks so much today for coming and talking to us on the App Fairy podcast, Raul. It's been really nice to have you here.
Thank you very much as well.
Hey, you there, Carissa! Oh, no. Is that you, Bad App Fairy? Of course it is. Who else has a voice this scratchy? Hey, I was listening to the rest of the interview on diversity sauce. Wait, you were listening to it right now while we were still having the interview? Yeah. Who cares about what you have to say? I want to hear what Kabir has to say. He's got great stuff. Anyway, I noticed that Raul was talking a lot about Tinybop's commitment to inclusivity in their app design. You know, like making sure that kids of lots of different races see themselves reflected in their apps. Yeah, I remember that part of the interview. That's in the part that people can listen to if they want to hear the rest of the interview on the original podcast, right? Yeah, that's it. Okay, well, what about it? Well, that reminded me of one of my favorite things to look for in a bad app. Cultural stereotypes and cultural appropriation. Oh, those are pretty big words, Bad App Fairy. What do you mean by that exactly? Well, you know, like when an app developer with no actual ties to Native American culture decides to include a character with a big headdress on, or maybe incorporates totem poles in a really inappropriate and disrespectful way, or, you know, design choices like these made without consulting members of the population being portrayed can often perpetuate stereotypes and can ultimately be harmful to kids of those cultures who choose to use their apps. And, you know, I just love stuff that's harmful for kids. Yeesh, Bad App Fairy, you're right. Cultural appropriation in apps is definitely not okay, but what about all of the apps that just avoid the issue by not including any diversity at all? Yeah, well, that's a whole nother set of issues. Luckily, the same people who have created the Diversity Sauce podcast also have a website at www.joinkidmap.org. That's join, Join, kidmap, KIDMAP.org, O-R-G, that includes a really helpful toolkit to help app developers think more deeply about how to make their apps more inclusive for all users. What? A free toolkit that's easy for app makers to use? Oh man, that is really going to cut down on all those juicy, culturally inappropriate apps that I love so much. What a bummer. Well, Bad App Fairy, I really hope it does cut down on them. I'm sure that you'll still be able to find lots of bad apps to love. That's true. There never seems to be a shortage of really bad apps. Hooray! Well, I'm out of here. Bye! See you later, Bad App Fairy. Thanks so much for listening today. The App Fairy podcast is a production of the Madison Public Library and is sponsored by the Heising Simons Foundation and the Joan Ganz Cooney Center, a nonprofit research and innovation lab dedicated to advancing children's learning in a digital age. Visit cooneycenter.org, that's COONEY center.org, for more information about the work they do. If you'd like more information about the podcast, be sure to check out our website at www.appfairy.org, where we'll post lots of goodies online for you to enjoy. A big thanks to Audrey Martinovich, our audio engineer, David Seste, who created our theme music, and Hannah Sandvold, who designed our fantastic artwork and brought the App Fairy to life. My name is Carissa Christner. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Oh boy, my voice is really squeaky today. Let me try that again. Actually, Audrey, maybe I'll get some water. Much better. Okay. So today's hidden gem is called Odd Bot Out. That's ODDBOT, as in short for robot, out, O-U-T. And it's an app by Martin Magny. This app is really great for elementary age school kids and older kids, or maybe an older preschool kid who might like playing this with an older sibling or a parent, but it's a little bit more complicated than just preschool kids can do on their own. Basically, this is about a tiny robot that didn't pass his factory inspection, and he gets stuck inside the factory. And unfortunately, there's about 100 different challenge levels that players have to go through to help him get out of the factory. Although that's fortunate for you because that means a long time of gameplay. In order to get through the level, there's all sorts of interesting physics challenges challenges like having to build a set of stairs with some square blocks, or knowing which order to press the buttons to raise or lower levers or drawbridges. The design is very clean and simple, but the gameplay is challenging enough for both adults and kids, making it a perfect app for everyone to play together. I'm sure that you'll love it. If you do, be sure to check out Mekorama. That's Mekorama by the same app maker. It's another one with a robot, but this time it's in 3D. I'm sure you'll love it too. Enjoy it. Bye-bye.